All right. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Alayna Cole, and this is John Kane. And today we will be talking to you about accessibility in game design and ethical interfaces. So basically looking at accessibility as you might already be familiar with it, but also extending that concept and looking at different ways that you can design interfaces that are including and helping the people who are playing your games. Did you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Yeah, sure. My name's John. I've been working in games and web development for about 10 years now, mostly web development. I've released 2 games of my own, Killing Time at Lightspeed and Malodrops. Malodrops has some accessibility features built into it, and I hit quite a few roadblocks along that. Killing Time at... You've
won awards.
And it's won some awards.
Award-winning game designer, John Kane.
Yeah, they've both won Australian Game Developer Awards at the last 2 AGDAs. Killing Time at Lightspeed, I'm currently working on the mobile version and adding a lot of accessibility to a finished game, and so that's a completely different experience. And if I can do anything with this talk, is to hopefully throw out a whole bunch of little stones and make a whole bunch of little ripples so you can get some ideas of just like the things you can take an hour to do now that will make your game a lot more accessible and a lot better at the end, because trying to put all of this stuff in at the end is going to suck. Like, you need to be doing it now, and you need to be thinking about it the whole process of the project. Anyway, so we should get started. And
yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about me as well, yes. I guess. I didn't do that when I should have at the beginning. So yeah, like I said, I'm Alayna. I am most well known, I guess, nowadays for being the founder of Queerly Represent Me, which is an organisation that primarily does research in the field of representation of queerness in games, but also in the games industry. I'm also a writer and narrative designer, and I also teach. So I have a lot of kind of interest in the ways that you can incorporate access through the narrative aspects of games. And also I have a lot of interest in kind of teaching other people how to make good design choices and have that kind of carried forward. So all of that kind of gets distilled today into what I am doing here.
Cool.
So what is accessibility? As I kind of said, it's a little bit what you'd expect. So it's looking at audiences that have diverse needs and catering to those. It's allowing them to engage in games and interfaces, you know, as anybody should be able to. So it's about thinking about the different types of people who might be engaging with your game and figuring out how you can cater to those audiences. But it's also a little bit more than what you might expect from just the term accessibility. In games, accessibility is often used and kind of refers to that physical access aspect of things, and it covers things like, you know, colourblindness and dyslexia and any sort of physical hindrance, and we do talk a bit about those different things as well. But it's also about other types of diverse needs that you might not have considered before, and you might not even realise that the way you approach game design is putting up barriers for people that you might not have met before or had any interaction with. So yeah, it's about accommodating the needs of everybody that might pick up your game.
Cool. Doing accessibility like from the start is really good business. I need to like really emphasize this. Back in 2014, Borderlands 2 came out and had colorblind accessibility modes, and that was new. That was like actually pretty, it shook a lot of people up that a AAA game would have that. Within 2 years, review outlets were apologizing for not covering the fact that the witness wasn't colorblind accessible. There's a section in that game that requires normal color vision to perceive the puzzles properly. That's like 2 years difference between including it at all is groundbreaking to not having it is a reason for bad reviews and like public apologies. That's less than the time it takes to make most games. It's less than the time I spend on either of my games. So if you're not thinking about this stuff now, you're probably going to be totally outclassed by the time your game comes out. This is Hue. Hue's mechanics revolve around color. It would be easy to think that like color blindness would be hard to do. They added a simple image overlay to the colored objects in their game and included a single bullet point on their press kit because they didn't think it was going to be a big deal. The positive reviews and the 100% user scores that it got on Metacritic boosted it from a mid-60s, low-level review to 70s, 80s. It is huge for your press when you do this. You need to start thinking about how to manage this. It's also good for everyone, not just the people who are colorblind, not just the people who have limited mobility. More people use accessibility options than have the disability that it accounts for. There are some stats here. A lot of them speak for themselves. I included on-screen buttons for mellowdrops because I found at shows people playing with an iPad. It got really hard to rotate an entire iPad around. You got really tired quickly. In a straw poll I did, 3/4 of players used the thing that I added in as an afterthought. Like, more people liked that way of playing than the original way I designed my game. So you just need to start thinking now about how to design your games so that they can be played multiple ways through multiple inputs. And not just for cross-platform compatibility, like, is it on a touchscreen or is it on a desktop? Like, also, is it being played with a controller? Is it being played with a mouse? Is it being played with a keyboard?
So the long and short of it is there's no real excuses for not catering to diverse needs. I've been doing some research through the work that I do, and it basically has been showing that people who are underrepresented, when they do get these options or representation or something like that, it matters to them quite a lot. But people don't care when they're not being represented by those things. So you might cater to an underrepresented audience, and people who the majority of games are already kind of catering to would play that. They often just go, oh, okay, it's not representing me this time, that's fine. There's very little actual negative response to that. You obviously get the really, really vocal groups online that do kind of make up for their less vocal counterparts. But for the most part, in terms of statistics, quite a large number of people who are playing games that are kind of designed to have representation for underrepresented people don't actually really notice or care. So it's worthwhile kind of providing a multitude of options for a multitude of audiences. So everyone gets the positive feeling of feeling like they're being represented by something or catered to by something. But the people who kind of aren't being represented by that will probably still pick it up and play it anyway. It probably wouldn't actually impact you too much to cater for those underrepresented audiences.
Yeah, and if you're working on a game that has sort of low percentage encounter content, so branching narratives, things like that, the time you spend on a really low percentage branch of that narrative is going to hit less people than accessibility inclusions. Like, that amount of people is way more important to go after. We'll continue on. This is one of my personal bugbears with the games industry, is how we deal with human bodies. This is the 2015 US Olympic team. You can tell from these bodies, like, what they do, right? There's sumo wrestler, there's basketballers, rowers. Different types of activity give people different body shapes. And these are just like really fit people, right? This is not the diversity of average bodies. This is the diversity of really, really, really fit people. And then we get to games and everyone looks like this. Everyone looks like this. Everyone is white and voiced by Nolan North. And AAA games do this because it's safe. And if you do this as an indie game, you're competing with AAA and you're also leaving everything on the default settings and not standing out. And if you want to survive as an indie, you need to stand out. So don't be yet another face on this screen.
If we put your protagonist next to a bunch of AAA protagonists and we can't tell which one's a which, you need a different protagonist.
Dealing with... I hate this because it's tropey. It's tropey crap. And
if you haven't worked it out yet, this entire talk is just us being like, I hate this. This sucks.
Yeah, stop doing
it.
this, please. Large people know where to buy clothes that fit. If I see another fat character in a game whose like stomach is showing, Like, you're not making a good character, you're making just a pointless like visual gag that everyone has seen before. They're obsessed with food, their clothes don't fit, they're dumb, they don't talk, whatever. Congratulations, you've made Barney Gumble. Right? Like, people have seen this character on screen for 25 years now. Like, it's done, get over it, start designing characters better. Because also there's been a character in games for more than 25 years who's had clothes that fit. If he can find pants, so can you. Like, but how do you represent a physical body in UI? Possibly the best example I've ever seen of this ever is Saints Row. They have done amazingly clever things with this kind of three-way triangular slider. If you've seen Humble Bundle or any kind of website where you have multiple sliders that make up 100%, that's what this is. That's all this is doing. This is just a really clever UI for that. And it's, you know, how muscular are they? How skinny or fat are they? And it's those three things add up to 100% of the kind of morph shape of the body. And in Saints Row 2, they didn't do it in Saints Row 3, I think, but in Saints Row 2, they also had a slider for how masculine or feminine the body was. Rather than having, this is the male version, this is the female version, they had one human with a slider of how much they presented. And I think also in both games, the voices were chosen separately to the body type, which gives you the most flexibility ever for how your character presents in those games. This is the blueprint for how to do bodies in games. Copy this. Don't do all the other things. Copy these. Also, really think about how you label stuff, because Jesus. Yeah, do not ever do this. Like, consult with people and don't make mistakes like this. This happens a lot in clothing sites. Please don't do this ever. But also, bodies aren't about size. They're also about what you do with them. And it can be hard to, you know, have physical disability in your game, especially when those bodies move differently. That's an entire set of animations that you have to do. But characters like Junkrat and, you know, Sir Hammerlock, these are similar functioning bodies, but they don't have as much like animation cost, I guess, to make these as non-player characters. Add a whole lot of depth to the world because it shows how that world interacts with ability. It fleshes out your world and makes it more real, and that has huge benefits to how believable your world is and how believable your characters are. Also, the character of Doned in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which is a really old game now, that game's entire storyline revolves around that character's like relationship with their ability. So have a look at that and how that story like pulls that off, because it's very clever. In the real world, people are also differently abled. People use a huge range of tools to interact with your games. Windows 10 has just released an update that put eye tracking software into like all Windows now, so you can use eye tracking software in anything. That's going to be a thing we're going to have to start catching up on, because those devices are going to be used to play games starting now. Someone might use, you know, keyboard, mouse, gamepad, a baguette, joystick, bananas, frying pan. Like this is Dylan Beck, who's an Australian, New Zealand Twitch streamer who makes his own custom controllers. The tools that he uses to make custom controllers are the same things we put in games to make keys rebindable, adjustable sensitivity, simpler control schemes. If you can make a game that he can then just make a controller for, you've probably done your accessibility job. Also, add these features early. Key rebinding sucks. Like, I tried to add that into Malodrops at the very end, and it was a disaster, and I had to scrap that. And I am really annoyed at myself for not coding that system at the beginning. Yeah, okay. Also, people speak languages that aren't English. This might be something that seems obvious, but if you look for how to validate a name on the internet, you'll probably find a regular expression or some kind of solver that is only for English characters. And it sucks. And Arabic is one of the hardest languages to deal with. Unity does it really badly. The CryEngine is now getting Arabic support through Far Cry 5. They're adding Arabic localization. It is something that people are working on. There are tools available for you to start just dropping in translated strings into your games now. Polyglot Game Dev is a massive spreadsheet of gaming terms and what their equivalent is in every language. I was speaking with someone recently who is now going to start adding Arabic to that. So hopefully that will push that a bit forward.
And just be wary when you're doing things with stuff like Arabic that's not read the same direction that we read, that often, depending on the settings on your computer, when you're copying and pasting that, it can flip it. So just make sure that you have an original and you keep that original and you check it on the final, because somewhere along the line things may have actually been flipped back and forth, and you don't want to end up on nope-not-arabic.tumblr.com.
Yeah, it is a great site and you should look that up. Even then, using these things, have someone check it at the end, because it may not be correct in the usage that you're using it. Act really, really early, especially on translation and UI. I've worked on websites that are in 10 languages. Turkish especially takes, for the same amount of meaning, takes about twice as much space, which means all of the buttons overlap like this and break. And it breaks your design. It looks awful. So try and avoid it if you can. If you use things like sprite sheets in your game, try and have all of your images be swappable, because sometimes you can have imagery that is offensive to cultures. This is not just localizing Japanese things to Western markets and vice versa. This can also just be a company my partner works for switched their company wallpaper to a thing with a couple of children, and it showed their feet, and that was offensive to several people in the office, and that was a really big screw up. And it's things that you're not going to think of. So if it's swappable easy, and you maintain all of your images in a way that can be swapped out quickly and by region, you're going to save a lot of time in the long run. Algorithms are really big in web design right now. They seem like a really good idea, and then you hit the problems that they have. Scunthorpe is a town in England that for quite a while was banned from using Xbox Live and has repeatedly been banned from using online services. If you think about the name,
little bit of critical thinking.
You might see the problem. If you are just implementing a swear filter, real words and real people get caught in the crossfire. A lot of online services don't let you publicly say gay or queer or anything like that in your username, even if you are that and identifying as that. They are considered a slur, and so they get blocked. This is also an issue with using algorithms and machine learning for translation. Google Translate has a very, very large data set, but that data set is biased. And so a thing that came out recently was if you translate to Turkish, which has gender-neutral pronouns, and then translate back, the phrases, they are a doctor, they are a cleaner, or they are a maid, I think was the term.
Gendered work, yeah.
Gendered roles, they came back as he is a doctor and she is a cleaner, even though that there was no gender implied in the original. So putting blind faith in computer algorithms to do your work for you can have really bad consequences, especially with validation, especially with swear filtering. Have a human check it. All right, brains. We're on to brains and audience participation. Show of hands when you think you know where you would click to log in. Like seriously, put your hand up as soon as you see it. Right? I'm waiting till everyone has their hand up. This is, like, I'm serious, this is like testing how long it takes you to figure this out. Okay, like right up, because I'm gonna get half of you put your hands down probably in a minute. Okay, keep your hand up if you guessed it. Right?
Keep your hand up if you don't use Spotify. No, like if you guessed it right and don't use Spotify. Okay, there's a handful who are unfamiliar
there's a few,
and...
But
yeah.
right, you can see already why this sucks, right? And if you would like had vision impairment or any kind of other impairment that might stop you perceiving this website in perfect clarity, that sucks. It's right at the bottom corner. It doesn't even look like a button, right? It's the same hierarchy as the conditions and like privacy policy links.
Because they want you to press the fancy blue one that says Facebook.
Yeah, but that's signing up.
I know.
This is where you like place user acquisition above your existing users.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, in web design, that's an anti-pattern or a pattern that is used to trick people. If people have bought your game, you shouldn't be designing things like this anyway. But making your buttons look like buttons and making text that is clickable, or making things that are clickable react and look clickable is 90% of UI design anyway. You should be focusing on that. But like, consider what it's like for someone who, like, if you blurred your eyes and looked at that, like I did with the blocking it out, you would have no idea that that was where you were meant to click. So a whole bunch of like do's and don'ts really quickly. Don't accelerate or you can tween in a linear way in VR, but definitely don't like tween your player's motion a lot because that's a recipe for barfing. Moving backgrounds, if you can toggle them on or off, that's really helpful. Also toggling screen shake. I know several people who are just like very, very, very get motion sick from screen shake. Maladrops has the camera turns when you play the game, and so I added settings to change the speed of that or to just have it blink to the next rotation, and that helped deal with motion sickness a lot in that game. Also, don't use ableist language, especially in your Steam page. I still see huge flare-ups from games that use, you know, the phrase spastic to imply a lot of motion, which is not what that word means, right? Like, people just check your language.
Was the question about what tweening is? Do you want to explain what tweening is? There was a question.
Right. So tweening is where you use program code to manage animation from one point in space to the other. So if you want your player here and you just slide them along there. So a linear tween is that with just no acceleration. It's a constant kind of mechanic movement. Tweening with acceleration is like accelerating as you go. Accelerating in VR is bath down. Put your buttons in places that make sense. Don't just make them look like buttons, but like if someone keeps clicking on the wrong space in your UI, then that's probably where the thing should be. With don't tween your player, do tween your UI. If you just like click a button and everything disappears, that can be quite jarring for a lot of people. If you click, wait, 0.2 of a second and then move the menu off, and then bring in the new menu, that can be a lot better for people because they know sort of their action had an impact and now this is what's happened. The Nintendo Switch does an amazing job of using audio to convey whether an action is started by the user or the hardware. Have a look at that and how they use sound in that, because that is also great user feedback. And yeah, I've covered screen shake. Dyslexic font options. This is a big thing, especially if your game is really text heavy. But a lot of people have probably seen this. It's used in a few Australian games. Based on a study 6 months ago now, sorry, you can actually just do this. If you can increase the letter spacing, it has the same effect. The font, Open Dyslexic or Dyslexia, the reason that font works is because of the spacing between the letters much more than it is the shape of the letters. So if your game engine, Unity supports this now with Text Mesh Pro. It is not in Unreal yet, but it definitely is in HTML because you have the letter spacing and word spacing properties. You can start embedding this now, and I was talking to someone online on Twitter, and it took them 5 minutes to implement a toggle, and you can just do this now.
And when we talk about like ripple effects and little things that make a big difference, if you can spend 5 minutes increasing your letter spacing, congratulations, you just made your game more accessible. So
yeah.
It's all about those tiny little things that you could actually just checklist off.
Yeah, and I think the number of people that this helps is about 7%. So 7% of your users will be helped by this. And yeah, that's the Text Mesh Pro interface, and yeah, in HTML, it's just standard HTML properties. So if you're using Construct or an HTML-based engine, you can probably tweak it in the CSS code, underline the page, and not have to worry about like adding it to the page, adding it to the game. Accessibility is also difficulty. I personally have only come across like one game where an accessibility feature would have helped me play through, which was Thumper, which requires you to hit a button 3 times in rapid succession. So I will never get past level 4 of that game because I physically cannot hit that button fast enough. Nier Automata has done variable difficulty in a way that it blows my mind and should be looked at as like how to do interesting difficulty for years. What it does is it lets you toggle gameplay modes or factors of the gameplay. So you aim and shoot at enemies, or you can toggle a thing in the menu and your little robot helper will just shoot them for you and you don't have to worry about aiming in 3D space anymore. That is especially helpful for me because I don't like spinning the camera a lot when I'm playing, so I can just turn that section of the game off and still have the full experience story-wise. It does it for everything from shooting, dodging, damage, auto-healing. You can toggle everything in that game. It's great.
Cool. So this is the bit where I ramble and rant about gender and sexuality for ages, which anybody who knows me knows that that's what I do in my spare time. So gender and sexuality is an important part of accessibility as well, and you might not 100% understand why, but it is. Sex, gender, sexuality, it's important when you are asking questions about these things, whether it be about your player or in terms of character creation or something like that, that you actually understand what you're asking. So they're not the same thing. And often you don't even need to know the answers to these questions to actually get to the crux of what you're trying to find out. Often asking these questions actually just leads to a bunch of assumptions. So what are you trying to actually find out? Is it pronouns, titles, appearance, clothing? All of these things are obviously factors when you're creating a character in a game. But you don't necessarily need to ask a character's gender to find out the answers to them. So the question here is basically, how can you ask for the information you actually need? So here are some examples. If you're asking about pronouns, read-only memories is a really good example of how you might be able to do that. It basically provides 2 screens for the player to select between. The first screen has she and her, he and him, they and their, and the second screen has a couple of kind of more like lesser used, I guess, options, but still used options, and also an option for players to input their own custom pronouns. So you basically are just doing a switch out the same way that if the only two options were he or she, you would be switching between them based on the selection. You're just adding more things to what can be switched between in the interface. And it allows your players to create characters that are either indicative of them or to become more familiar with these kind of pronouns that they might not see all the time. Particularly if they're not, close friends with somebody who uses they, them pronouns or something like that. And so that ability to kind of get people more familiar with something or to represent themselves is really important. Sunless C gives you titles instead. It also gives you options for non-binary characters as well. And basically all it wants to know is what your character will be referred to as, so lord or lady or,
Mind your own business is one of them, I think.
I think that's in Fallen London. There's like there's a squid. Why are we asking this question? There's a squid. It's very important. So yeah, it's like Sir, Madame, and then there's also some general like citizen. There's some other ones that I haven't got on that screen cap as well, but there's some gender neutral ones as well. And so basically then in dialogue you're referred to using a title, but there was absolutely no need for that game to ask your gender or your character's gender because all it wanted to know was what it was going to refer to you as. So get to the crux of what you're asking and actually ask that, not a question that you can then assume that from. Pokemon Sun and Moon, it says choose your hero and it gives you a selection of faces you can choose from. Is it asking for the player's appearance? It kind of sounds like it, but no, for some reason that's a gender select screen, because then from that point onward it will use pronouns for you based on what it assumes that face means. The weirdest thing in that game is that not only is there this kind of weird screen where there's like, the top row definitely could be like kind of androgynous folk who like to be called she, her, that's totally fine. That's why I played that whole game as a he, because I picked one of them because I liked them. But then you can go and modify your character's look later, and both the male characters and female characters can be made to look really similar to each other in like kind of systems later on. So if you're going to give the players an option to kind of pick whatever pronouns they want and then pick an androgynous appearance if they want, let them do both of those things and let them do it at the start, as opposed to, oh, you need to guess that this is a gender select screen, and then you have to get through the first bit, and then you have to find a hairdresser, and then you can look androgynous but still be she, her. It's like, what are you gaining from those decisions that you're kind of making in your design process? Actually ask what you're trying to get the information for. A similar story with Animal Crossing. Asks if you're cute or cool. Is it actually asking whether you're cute or cool? No, it's asking your gender, because I'm cute and he's cool. So yeah, no, it's gender for some reason. All of this is gender for some reason, and I don't understand why. It upsets me a little bit. Can we not? Please. Long story is asking for appearance and pronouns, and it just does that. It's like, what's your face? What's your pronouns? What's your name? Off we go. It's very much just straightforward, like ask what you are trying to find out.
You can change those at any point in the game, which is also a really important thing to add, if you can.
Fluidity is awesome, and things like Pyre do that as well really well, where you can go into the menu and just change the pronouns around at any point. So that's a really cool setting to have. Sims 4 is also on there as something that's kind of asking mechanics. It kind of still asks for your gender and whatnot as well, but it does a really good job of getting to the crux of like what that is actually doing in game. So for The Sims, what that's doing is, what's your physical frame like? Are you a masculine or feminine frame? What are we building with? And you can choose that. What is your clothing preference? You can change that as well. So you will say one and it just kind of changes what it automatically filters for you basically. But it will still allow you to kind of remove that filter and you can get all the options. And then it says, will this sim be able to become pregnant, get others pregnant, or neither? Because that's a mechanic in game and they want to know what they assign your character. And then it says, does your sim use the toilet standing? Yes or no? Is that a possibility for your sim? And you can just go through and make whatever selections you want. And this is so much better than selecting male and having it auto-check those things based on the assumptions of what a man does. Like, this idea that, like, it would automatically select, does this character use the toilet standing up if you picked man in a lot of the earlier Sims games? And not every man even uses the toilet standing up. Like, this is not an assumption that needs to be made. Ask what you're actually trying to find out and what you're trying to implement. But what if you do actually need to know sex or gender or sexuality or something like that? Even outside of games, in web interface or survey collection or anything like that, if you actually do need to know, A, allow your users to opt out. So you will gather a lot of data even like just by having the option there, but don't make it compulsory. And understand what you're actually asking and ask that is still the rule. Figure out the differences between these terms. There are resources available for that. I've written a resource that's available for that. So make sure that you kind of do some research and figure out what you're actually trying to find out. Don't ask gender questions using radio buttons. And don't make it so that it's compulsory and that male is auto-selected. Because that, yeah, no.
Not only is it bad UI and awful for users, it screws your data because people skip it and then you get way more
of whatever the default was, which is usually male.
Also, if you set up a database and make gender a Boolean type, I will come and find you.
Don't only have two options, because there's not only two options. Don't make the question compulsory, and don't always have male as the default. Don't do this. This is the worst, don't do this. Here is an example just from OkCupid, right? So it's probably not necessarily the best option, but it is a reasonably good option of someone who has tried to accommodate as many people as possible and also given their community the ability to actually contribute to the kind of project of figuring out what options to provide. So there are kind of a lot of things that happen on OkCupid that aren't okay, particularly coming from users a lot of the time. But the way that it does filtering based on the selections that you can make can be quite effective, and it does provide users with lots and lots of choices. Similarly, something like Facebook now provides a lot of choices in terms of the pronouns you select and the genders you select. You don't get kind of limited to binary genders on there anymore either. So kind of think about the options you provide, how many options you can provide, and if it's not too many, how you can do that well, and if it's as many as you can think of, how you can do that well. But try to kind of look at your limitations and then try to use them as effectively as you can.
Yeah, and please use the word custom rather than other, because otherwise you're literally othering people.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So yeah.
That's just a UI thing.
Totally. There's other things you can use as well, like another gender is a recommendation that's been made for not using other. But yeah, the Australian Bureau of Statistics is like, just use other, don't just use other. And this is a lovely quote from Charlie about why using other is not the best plan. So if you know Charlie, Charlie goes by they, them, and gave me this beautiful quote to talk about the idea of othering your audience. So yeah, don't do that. These statistics are from the census, though, from, the Australian Bureau of Statistics did do other as the option, and it just kind of shows you how many people selected that. And yeah, like, it's important to kind of bear in mind the fact that a lot of people do that, and therefore you should probably cater for them if you want them to play your game and feel included by it.
And the highest bars of the other sex, gender response, that's the prime gaming market? Yeah? Cool.
So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about now is character creation. So a lot of people default to character creation as the optimal way to diversify your game. It's not, but it is something that you still need to learn how to do well. So there are a lot of better ways you can diversify or different ways you can diversify, but actually including characters who are, diverse without the player having to do the labour of making them diverse. So that's important to think about too. But if you are going to provide customization options, make sure that you think about the options you're providing. This is the screen that you see when you first start character creation in Fallout 4. You get the default of a white man, and you get the secondary choice of a white woman, and that's what you get. And I hope that they just didn't think about it. Like, There are so many reasons that that's not cool. And I'm assuming most people kind of can see why, but you don't want to create an actual literal default out of the white cis man and then be like, oh, and his partner in crime, the secondary character, the woman who's also white. There are better ways to do that as well.
This is kind of just like the radio buttons in 3D, right?
Yes, it is. So some do's and don'ts for character creators, and we've kind of covered little bits and pieces of this too, but these are some checklists. Like, I want to give you actual checklists that you can use from this. Randomize your default characters. You have a bunch of options that you've just provided to your player. Let them kind of see them in use from the get-go. Randomize what you get out of that. Ask what you need to know. Don't just ask what everyone else asks. Don't just look at every character creator that came before your own and be like, we'll use those questions. I'm sure they were well researched, because they probably weren't. Provide options for body diversity, as we've talked about, shape, size, and characteristics. Consider all the options that you've given your player, and then really think about what you're including and what you're excluding. I definitely don't think that everyone's capable of including literally everything in a game. There are going to be some limitations, whether it be because of technical aspects or, time or scope or whatever. But if you can realise what you haven't included and make an actual decision about whether or not to include that thing and why, and be very aware of your choice and why you made it and be able to talk to that, that's a world better than just not thinking about it. So step one is thinking about it and figuring out what you're actually capable of and kind of becoming familiar with that for your own project. Don't make a white middle-aged able-bodied man the default. It also extends to, cis and neurotypical and all of the different things. Don't make like the default character everything that society tells us is normal. Don't do that. Don't restrict options arbitrarily, so don't make it so that, okay, you chose this option, so now you only get these voice options, or you chose X, so now you only get this clothing, or whatever. There's often no reason for that. If you can adjust those things for body shapes, then you can adjust it for all the body shapes that you've provided, not just like the male ones for those outfits. So kind of try and be as inclusive with those options as you can, because your players will probably want to experiment in ways that you haven't even thought of. Don't make assumptions based on the information that you've been given. Still me.
Still you.
These are some stats from a survey that I've been doing and working through very slowly through Clearly Represent Me. There's a lot more info on these kind of stats online as well, but this is like the crash course. Basically, this is showing some information from people and what they care about with character creation. So we asked a bunch of different questions, and one of those questions was, do you care about diversity? And we got yeses and nos, and maybes, but yeses and nos. It was kind of 1/3 yeses and 2/3 nos, basically, in the end. And then we kind of asked more deep diving questions about, like, what does that mean? What do you actually care about? And how does that kind of factor into your games and your choices and all of that? And these questions were about character creation. So you've got two different coloured bars there. There's green at the top and blue at the bottom. I did put it through a colour blindness thing, but I don't know if the lighting on there is ruining that or not for me. So sorry if you can't differentiate. But the no's are on top and the yeses on the bottom. And basically it's going through and showing you how much different people cared about different options in character creation. So the no's are people who didn't care about diversity, and the yeses are people who do, and then how much they care about different options. And you can see from there that yeses and nos both care about diverse options and choices and being able to change things more than they do about something like realism. And that's what the graph on the other side is showing. Basically that everybody cares about diverse choices, but realism is something that everyone's kind of like, I don't really care that much about. And then people who don't care about diversity care about realism a little bit more than the people who do care about diversity, apparently. But just marginally, not enough to be statistically significant. So yeah, at the end of the day, this is basically just showing you through some stats that we have that adding diverse options will benefit even people who don't apparently care about diverse options in games. Which brings us to Dream Daddy, who I think, what I think John would be able to talk about for 1,000,000 years if I let him. But this is one of those games that does character creation really well. It asks what it needs to know. It gives only a handful of options, but the way that it's used, its scope is really effective in including a whole bunch of people. It allows you to be trans, but it doesn't say, are you trans? It allows you to have like a binder body as your kind of choice, but it still keeps its humour without being offensive. Hopefully, most of the stories I've heard about it have been really positive ones at least. And then as you go through, it asks questions about whether your daughter was adopted and whether your previous partner was a woman or a man. So it allows you to decide as a male main character whether you are in some way non-monosexual or if you are gay or whatever, kind of based on those choices and your history, and then whether you adopted your daughter. So it only asks you what it needs for the narrative, because those things come up later. It doesn't ask you kind of anything else. Obviously, this is kind of limited by the fact that you can only play a man, so it doesn't have to ask gender-related questions or anything like that. But for what it does very, very well. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. But
Cool.
As a UI thing, this is really what you should be stealing from. They do it very well. And even if you're not into visual novels, you should play through the first 10 minutes just to see how well it does character creation.
Also, when your character creator shouts, "Build that dad," at you when you open it.
Oh God, the voiceover is great.
So good.
Okay. I talked a bit about hue before. We're running close to time, but we'll plow through it. The term you need to look for online is called brewer palettes. They are 100% tested, colorblind safe color palettes. You can see the kind of standard one here. If you're using text, make sure that your text is high contrast compared to the background. There are tools online to test that. They're HTML-based tools, but you can just put in hex colors and double check. Have brightness and contrast adjustment in your game. They seem like a strange AAA thing that's in there for sort of no reason, but also they are actually really useful for a lot of people. And if you think those colors before were ugly, this is just the defaults. Like, that is 100 color palettes that you could use. If you can't find one to fit your game in that, I don't know, you have to come up with something magical. And the link for that is in the bottom, and you can just pull the colors off of that file. And those are all tested. And so if there's 8 colors on a little swatch thing, they are all different enough for all types of color blindness. Audio, almost 80% of people play with subtitles on. That's amazing. If you're doing a game with dialogue, do subtitles. It's so important. If you are doing subtitles, there are a couple of different standard ways, either having a black block background or having stroke, or having the text be white or yellow. If you can add those toggles in as well, people will freaking love you, because some people feel really strongly about those. Having separate controls for volume, sound effects, speech, music, you've seen those in AAA games, you know what those look like. If you can, add mono audio as a toggle, because some people have hearing difficulty only in one ear, and if your game requires directional sound, that can just totally screw up the experience for some people. Google and other services have text-to-speech systems that you can ping and get, rough audio to sort of start with if you want to do the voiceover type thing in iOS. I've written a tool to ping Google to get placeholder audio assets for voiceover, and we're now starting to see sign language start showing up in games. There's a VR game called Moss coming out soon, and its main character Quill is a little mouse, and it can communicate to you through gestures and mimes, but also through American Sign Language, which is freaking cool. And if those start coming into character sets as pre-done animations, either through ASL or Auslan, which is the Australian equivalent, that's going to become huge. That's just so cool. I'm excited about that. Also, if you're doing games where sound is a big thing, have a UI. Mark of the Ninja does this incredibly well. If a thing drops and makes a sound, a sonar ping comes off it. That shows you who can hear it, but also is feedback for the player. It's absolutely great. When you are doing audio in a multiplayer setting, having a visual cue for the person who's talking so you can see who is talking to you is really helpful. Also letting people, like, this is less accessibility and more just like not wanting to deal with people calling me names online. Let people pick if they want people with audio or without, because sometimes people need the audio. Some people can't have the keyboard chat and play at the same time. We talked about the Scunthorpe problem before. If you don't want to deal with the rude language of text chat, you can use pre-built systems the way that Armello and Hearthstone do. They're really clever and actually help prevent a toxic community starting. Because if you can't be toxic at someone, it's very hard for that to envelop your game.
So to bring us to takeaways so that you actually know what you're walking out of here from, this is the one to take a photo of. Start thinking about your accessibility and your inclusivity early. Think about it as early as you can so you can actually implement these features. Always ask questions, always consult with people, always do your research, and always make sure that everything in your game is checked. Don't expect people to consult for free. So you need to do your research, and obviously you're going to be able to kind of grab some favors from people at some point or another in your career, particularly when you're starting out if you don't have the financial situation for that. But just be aware that consulting for free is a whole lot of labor that people are doing to help you kind of look after them. So it's kind of like there's like a trade-off, right? Like they're putting in work so that you put in work so that they feel accepted by your game, when kind of you should be doing that anyway.
Also, there's probably the questions that they're sick of answering.
Yeah, absolutely. So just make sure that you're very aware of that, and where you can, make sure you pay your consultants. Don't not consult because you can't pay them. Do your research in ways that you can, but just be very aware of that. Consider why you need information from your player at any point. Think about what you're actually asking. Don't make assumptions based on the information that you receive. If you offend somebody, use it as a chance to learn and do better. There are a lot of different things that happen just in a day-to-day basis, let alone in the games and systems we make, where we have weird habits that we do and we immediately go, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Even when we're trying really, really hard to avoid certain things, like accidentally using wrong pronouns for somebody, accidentally using ableist language. I've already heard it in talks today with people using words like, it was crazy, and I do that too, but you probably shouldn't. So try to avoid using words and gestures as much as you can. Like, I probably have done things even while I've been standing here, and I'm trying to learn and be better. So if you offend someone, take that as a learning opportunity. And access resources. So learn from good examples, improve yourself as much as you can. Keep coming to talks where people throw examples at you so that you have access to those resources.
And Queerly Rep Me is a great resource.
Thank you. Bless you.
Okay, these are all the things that we've talked about. This is also the things that you should be taking photos of. All of this stuff that we've talked about today is just like, it's checking your blind spots when you're driving. It's just making sure all the way through your process that you're not screwing up and crashing. And do everything early, because it is so much harder to try and implement these in a system that's already built. And part 2, off you go. Yeah, the accessibility hashtag on Twitter is ally, but the L's replaced with ones, because it's 11 letters between A and Y, which is cool. There is actually a lot of really good conversation going along in the web space about how to do accessibility and how to make accessibility tools. Highly recommend checking it out.
And if you've missed anything in this as well, just be aware, like, I will definitely put the slides up. I am from Queensland, so I will do that when I get back home in a week or so, but that's my Twitter handle. I'll be tweeting about them, so feel free to.
This is us.
Yep.
And thank you.
Tweet questions at us. We like them. Tweet us.
Yeah.
Ask us
Sorry we
things.
don't have time, but tweet anything at us and we'll try and answer.